In the pentagram rite, I saw a triangle of 3 green lights. It was an equilateral triangle, and it angled to have its top point pointing somewhat left. With the first set of vibrations, I saw a pink flash, not quite spherical, in a regular shape, to the left, as I saw 3 concentric rings of green. In the remaining set of vibrations, I saw a hut that was red and pointy. It had green light coming out from within, and it had 1 entrance or exit as far as I could see, and a window. In the 5th vibration set, I ended up seeing like Aurora Borealis, or it could have been a comet, but it's bigger than I think a comet could have been. It was certainly bigger than Hale-Bopp. When this book has its triplicity model, I think it should have listed all the Amesha the 7. Then it should have just said the Fravashis at the bottom and the Yazatas in the middle. Because the Yazatas basically is how the priests reincorporated all the old worship or things they thought were left out into the system. A second thing, earlier in the book, that I would disagree with is that just because certain individuals wrote in their native language doesn't mean they were getting their principles from that. You can, or that they, had Persian contact or Persian culture per se. It doesn't mean that they didn't get their teachings from the religions. Certainly Islam and, whichever branch of Buddhism you look at, were certainly detailed enough in their cosmology and techniques and such that you don't have to explain them through the Persian influence. The Jews and the Christians, on the other hand, you definitely see this, particularly if you take the view of historical Judaisms and historical Christianities, and you see how they branch off of other paths in particular. I would be careful in the mentioning of numerology and astrology, much more so than this book does, in the aspect that the actual teachings of what sort of symbols and what they meant and that sort of stuff may not be as, you can take it and look at what another culture does with it and say that this is this thing that they were doing with it. But I would agree that it does help immensely to have an idea of the natural world when you employ these rituals. The idea of breaking down the ritual structure to a few elements, and that's why Zoroastrian rituals can be, so brief or so adaptable. And I've talked more about that elsewhere, like the replacement model. Like if you don't know a ritual, and you say it's good to do this ritual, well, there's a certain number of Yata'ahu Va'erios and Achambohus and other such formulas that you can repeat more in place of doing these rituals. I think that's a good concept. And this book goes into how it's, more than a, exchange sort of thing. And how, just like Islam, the idea of Adam and Eve isn't just some curse on humanity and we're punished for, in the church I was raised in, it was man shall be punished for their own sin and not for Adam's transgression and all that sort of stuff. But that different approach to that is a very important thing to look at. And there's certain things that I was sort of unaware when reading this book, because they've looked into, maybe I've come across some of it before, but I think there's more connections to the whole magi and magician and stuff than meets the eye. Now, one thing that I would like to say about my initial operation of this is that in the final reading, I felt 3 particular wipes down of euphoria. And the first couple, they felt good. It relieved some pain, but it didn't quite get to the point of my recently sprained ankle. It didn't loosen up, the joints and that sort of thing. That didn't happen until the 3rd one. Now, in the final scrying, I saw light yellow, green sort of colored 7 groups around me. Like over my head, like some sort of aura, but broken, but they weren't all exactly the same shape. Now, I would very much agree with this book in the aspect that the Sufis, largely, rather than taking things from Islam and drawing them out and stuff, some of them kind of syncretized religions. They kind of, okay, I'm going to practice Islam in a Zoroastrian sort of way. And technically, at its root, all these religions are supposed to be like the same anyways. So that's not really doing anything out of the ordinary. It is a very interesting list of stuff related to cosmology. It kind of points out that some of the cosmology already wasn't taken literally when it was put down, and some of the lack of precise meanings of some of these things. Well, I think they did have meanings that were coherent and broad, at least in their original forms, and maybe some of that was lost. But they actually served functions that made the meaning like almost secondary, right? And so we have ideas of how to operate within yourself, within the ritual space, within the whole world and its beings. And you have, cosmologies to act with the beings, and some beings that you don't act upon. So there was a sharp distinction drawn between magic as sihr, or as the ancient Egyptians would have added a second form, sahr and sihr, denoting the internal and the external forms of playing with the heat, or the davas, as they're called. I would disagree with this author in terms of the there's a bunch of different words for gods and goddesses, and it's like, well, things that people treat as gods and goddesses, yes. And of course, let's remember that probably just like Muhammad, Zarathustra, as far as the evidence points, he wasn't part of the ritual drug use, he wasn't part of polytheism. He was aware that certain beings existed, and admitting that they exist and maybe deserve respect, but they don't deserve to be prayed to or through or that sort of thing, that we have respect for our ancestors. Modern magicians often talk about 3 types of ritual spaces or altars or whatever, and I kind of, agree with that for myself. As you got your mainstream ceremonies, I don't have any, I don't have the Corda Avesta or anything like this in this room at that time. And then you have a ceremonial magic room where maybe there'll be implements, and then are grimoires that you operate with. And another form that you would indicate use of is the ancestral. But then again, it's, because the ancestral, you want to include the reference. And so the approach of the evil magician and the sacred devotee magician is going to be different. Certainly the same areas can be worked with. Ritual drug use, well, instead of ritual drug use, perhaps we're going to work up a sort of trance, aren't we? And of course, any magical theory, an important thing for us to employ is going to be something about our own individual talents, our own individual experience and message that we're going to get.